Hello, my friends. What a day. What a day. What a day. Boy, my beard is. I don't know. Might be time to get rid of it. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure. I will say, I don't know if you can tell from the camera, but I'm definitely getting a lot more grays. And I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm stressing out. Though I don't really feel very stressed out. Maybe I'm just hitting that part of my life. When my dad, by the time my dad was 21, he was salt and pepper. So, like, he was this, but it's hair. And pretty much for most of my life, all I've remembered is my dad being a gray haired man, even though he wasn't. He started getting gray hair when he was 12 years old. Um, which, boy, that's a stinker, right? But anywho, excuse me. Time to pick up. Let's do some reading. Let's talk some current events. Definitely some interesting things took place today in our country. But boy, I'll tell you, I was talking to my son about this book. It's different, right, from April Morning, but I like it. Like I like it a lot. I don't know that I like these Polish and Lithuanian names, but I don't know. I'm just really enjoying this. Is such a neat story about such a sad but really cool time in our nation's history. So I think when we left off, it was that kooky old grandma, right? Was kind of giving them the rundown of the history of their house. So let's pick up from there. So this grim old woman went on with her tale of horrors. How much of it was exaggeration, who could tell? It was only too plausible. There was that about consumption, for instance. They knew nothing about consumption whatsoever, except that it made people cough. And for 2 weeks, they had been worrying about a coughing spell of Antanas. It seemed to shake him all over, and it never stopped. You could see a red stain whenever he spit on the floor. And yet, all these things were as nothing to what came a little later. They had begun to question the old lady as to why one family had been unable to pay, trying to show her by figures that it ought to have been possible. And grandmother had disputed their figures. You say $12 a month, but does not include the interest. Then they stared at her. Interest, they cried. Interest on the money you owe, she answered. But we don't have to pay any interest, they exclaimed. 3 or 4 at once. We only have to pay $12 each month. Whoops. And for this, she laughed at them. You are like all the rest, she said. They trick you and they eat you alive. They never sell the houses without interest. Get your deed and see. Then, with excuse me, excuse me. Then, with a horrible sinking of heart, Tetta unlocked her bureau and brought out the paper that had already caused them so many agonies. Now they sat around, scarcely breathing, while the old lady, who could read English, ran it over. Yes, she said, here it is, of course, with interest thereon monthly at a rate of 7% per annum. And there followed a dead silence. What does that mean? Asked Yorgis finally. That means, she replied, that you have to pay them $7 next month, as well as the $12. Then again, there was no sound. It was sickening, like a nightmare, in which suddenly something gives way beneath you, and you feel yourself sinking and sinking into a bottomless abyss. As if a flash of lightning, they saw themselves, victims of a relentless fate, cornered, trapped in the grip of destruction. All the fair structure of their hopes came crashing about their ears. And all the time the old woman was going on talking, they wished that she would be still. Her voice sounded like a croaking of some dismal raven. Yorgis sat with his hands clenched in clenched and beads of perspiration on his forehead, and there was a great lump in Ona's throat, choking her. Then suddenly Teta broke the silence with a wail, and Mareja began wringing her hands to sob. Ay, ay, Bedaman! All their outcry did them no good, of course. There sat grandmother, unrelenting, typifying fate. No, of course, it was not fair, but then fairness had nothing to do with it. And of course, they had not known it. They had not been intended to know it, but it was in the deed. And that was all that was necessary, as they would find when the time came. Somehow or another, they got rid of their guest, and then they passed a night of lamentation. The children woke up and found out that something was wrong, and they wailed and would not be comforted. In the morning, of course, most of them had to go to work. The packing houses would not stop for their sorrows. But by 7 o'clock, Ona and her stepmother were standing at the door of the office of the agent. Yes, he told them when he came in, it was quite true that they would have to pay interest. Then Teta broke forth into procrastinations and reproaches, so that the people outside stopped and peered in the window. The agent was bland as ever. He was deeply pained, he said. He had not told them simply because he had supposed they would understand that you have to pay interest upon debt, as a matter of course. So they came away, and Ona went down to the yards, and at noontime saw Jurgis and told him. Jurgis took it stolidly. He had made up his mind to it by this time. It was part of fate. They would manage it somehow. He made his usual answer. I will work harder. It would upset their plans for a time, and it would perhaps be necessary for Ona to get work after all. Then Ona added that Teta had decided that little Stanislovas would have to work too. It was not fair to let Jurgis and her support the family. The family would have to help as it could. Previously, Jurgis had... Whoa! Sorry. Little... I don't know what that was. Oh, let me stick that back up there. It's just a little sticky note. So Ona set out on that day. Oh, I'm sorry. Previously, Jurgis had scouted this idea, but now knit his brows and nodded his head slowly. Yes, perhaps it would be best. They would have to all make some sacrifices. So Ona set out on that day to hunt for work, and at night Mareja came home saying that she had met a girl named, oh boy, Yazatite, who had a friend that worked in one of the wrapping rooms in Brown's and might have a place for Ona there. Only the forelady was the kind that takes presents. It was no use for anyone to ask her for a place unless at the same time they slipped a $10 bill into her hand. Jurgis was not in the least surprised at this by now. He merely asked what the wages of the place would be. So negotiations were opened, and after the interview, Ona came home and reported that the forelady seemed to like her, and had said that she was not sure, though she thought she might be able to put her work at sewing covers on hams, a job at which she would earn as much as $8 to $10 a week. That was a bid, so Mareja reported, after consulting her friend, and that there was an anxious conference, and at that there was an anxious conference at home. The work was done in one of the cellars, and Jurgis did not want Ona to work in such a place. But then it was easy work, and one could not have everything. So in the end, Ona, with a $10 bill burning a hole in her palm, had another interview with the forelady. Meantime, Teta had taken Stanislovas to a priest and gotten a certificate to the effect that he was 2 years older than he was. And with it, the little boy now sallied forth and made his fortune in the world. It chanced that Durham had just put a wonderful new lard machine, and when the special policeman in front of the time station saw Stanislovas and his document, he smiled to himself and told him to go, pointing, and to Stanislovas went down the long stone corridor and up a flight of stairs, which took him into a room lit by electricity, with the new machines for filling lard cans at work in it. The lard was finished on the floor above, and it came in little jets, like beautiful, ringling, snowy white snakes of unpleasant odor. There were several kinds of sizes of jets, and after a certain precise quantity had come out, each stopped automatically, and the wonderful machine made a turn and took the can under another jet, and so on, until it was filled nearly to the brim. And then it was pressed tightly and smoothed off. To attend to all of this and fill several hundred cans of lard per hour, there were necessary two human creatures, one of whom knew how to place the empty lard can on the empty spot every few seconds, and the other for whom would now take the full cans off the certain spot every few seconds and set it upon a tray. And so, after little Stanislovas good gazing had stood gazing timidly about for a few minutes, a man approached him and asked what he wanted. To which Stanislaus said, "Job." Then the man said, "How old?" And Stanislaus answered, 16. Once or twice every year, a state inspector would come wandering through the packing plants, asking a child here and there how old he was. And so the packers were very careful to comply with the law, which cost them as much trouble as was now involved in the boss taking the document from the little boy and glancing at it, then sending it to the office to be filed away. Then he set someone else at a different job and showed the lad how to place a lard can every time the empty arm of the remoteless machine came to him. And so was decided the place in the universe of little Stanislovas, and his destiny till the end of days. Hour after hour, day after day, year after year, it was fated that he should stand upon a certain square foot of floor from 7 in the morning until noon, and again from half past 12 to half past 5, making never a motion and thinking never a thought, save for the setting of lard cans. In summer, the stench of the warm lard would be nauseating, and in winter the cans would all but freeze on his naked hands in the unheated cellar. Half of the year it would be dark at night when he went into work, and dark and dark at night when he came out. And so he would never know what the sun looked like on weekdays. And for this, at the end of the week, he would carry home $3 to his family, being his pay at the rate of 5 cents per hour. Just about his proper share of the total earnings of 1.75 million of the children who are now engaged in earning their livings in the United States. And meantime, because they were young and hope is not to be stifled before this time, Jonas and Ona were again calculating, for they had discovered that the wages of Stanislavs would a little more than pay the interest, which left them just about where they had been before. It would be fair to them to say that the little boy was delighted with his work and the idea of earning a lot of money, and also that the two were very much in love with each other. Well, I guess things are a little bit better for the family overall. The little 14-year-olds packing lard cans, but at least for the time being, it looks like they're going to keep the house. Chapter 7. So all summer long, the family toiled, and in the fall, they had money enough for Yorgos and Ona to be married accordingly, in the home traditions of decency. In the later part of November, they hired a hall and invited all the new acquaintances who came and left them over $100 in debt. It was a bitter and cruel experience, and it plunged them into an agony of despair. Such a time of all times for them to have it, when their hearts were made tender. Such a pitiful beginning it was for their married life. They loved each other so, and they could not have the briefest respite. It was the time when everything cried out to them, and they ought to be happy, when wonder burned in their hearts and leapt into the flames at the slightest breath. They were shaken to the depths of them with the awe of love realized, and it was very weak of them that they had cried out for a little peace. They had opened their hearts like the flowers of springtime, and the merciless winter had fallen upon them. They wonder if ever any love that had blossomed in the world had ever been so crushed and trampled. Going back to the beginning of the book where the people are kind of stiffing them and not keeping up with well, they're not stiffing them, but they're not keeping up with the traditions of what a typical marriage should be like. Over them, relentless and savage, they cracked the lash of want. The morning after the wedding, it sought them as they slept and drove them out before daybreak to work. Ona was scarcely able to stand with exhaustion, but if she were to lose her place, they would be ruined, and she would surely lose it if she were not on time that day. They all had to go, even little Stanislovas, who was ill from the overindulgence in sausages and sarsaparilla. All that day he stood at the lard machine, rocking unsteadily, his eyes closing in spite of him, and he all but lost his place even so, for the foreman booted him twice to waken him. It was fully a week before they were all normal again, and meantime, with whining children and cross adults, the house was not a pleasant place to live in. Jorgis lost his temper very little. However, all things considered, it was because of Ona. At least, at, at least glance at her as always enough to make him control himself. She was so sensitive. She was not fitted for such a life as this, and 100 times a day when he thought of her, he would clench his hand and fling himself again at the task before him. She was too good for him, he told himself, and he was afraid, because she was his. So long had they hungered to possess, so long he had hungered to possess her. But now that the time had come, he knew that he had not earned the right. That she trusted him, so was all her own simple goodness, and no virtue of his. But he was resolved that she should never find this out, and so was always on the watch to see that he did not betray any of his ugly self. He would take care of even the little matters, such as his manners and his habit of swearing when things went wrong. The tears came so easily in Ona's eyes, and she would look at him so appealingly. It kept Jorgis quite busy making resolutions. In addition to all other things he had on his mind, it was true that more things were going on at this time in the mind of Jorgis than had ever gone on in all of his life. That's just my cat knocking and throwing things all over the game room. I'm not too sure what she's got now, but it's probably something that she shouldn't. He had to protect her, to do battle for her against the horror he saw about them. Yes, you hear her yelling at me? He was all that she had to look to, and if he failed, she would be lost. He would wrap his arms about her and then try to hide her from the world. He had learned the ways of things about him now. It was a war against each other and all, and the devil take the hindmost. You did not give feasts to other people. You waited for them to give feasts to you. You went about with your soul full of suspicion and hatred. You understand that you were environed by hostile powers that were trying to get your money, and who used all the virtues to bait their traps with. The storekeepers plastered up their windows with all sorts of lies to entice you. The very fences by the wayside, the lampposts, the telegraph poles were pasted over with lies. The great corporation which employed you lied to you, and lied to the whole country. From top to bottom, it was nothing but one gigantic lie. Well, it seems as though for Jorgis, the old fit has hit the shan, as they say. So Jorgis said that he understood it, and yet it was really pitiful, for the struggle was so unfair. Some had so much the advantage. Here he was, for instance, vowing upon his knees that he would save Ona from harm. And only a week later, she was suffering atrociously, and from the blow of an enemy that could not possibly have been thwarted. There came a day when the rain fell in torrents, and beginning in September, to be wet with it, to have to sit all day in one of those cold cellars of Brown's was no laughing matter. Ona was a working girl, and she did not own waterproofs and such things, and so Jorgis took her and put her on a streetcar. Now it chanced that the car line was owned by the gentlemen who were trying to make money, and the city having passed an ordinance requiring them to give transfers, they had fallen into a rage. And the first that they had made was a rule that transfers could be had only when the fare was paid, and later, growing still uglier, they had made another that the passengers must ask for the transfer, and the conductor was not allowed to wait a minute. That the passenger must ask for the transfer. The conductor was not allowed to offer it. Ah, I see. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Now Ona had been told that she was to get a transfer, but it was not her way to speak up. So she merely waited, following the conductor about her eyes, wondering when she would think of her, what he would think of her. When at last the time came for her to get out, she asked for the transfer and she was refused. Not knowing what to make of this, she began to argue with the conductor in a language of which he did not understand a word. After warning her several times, he pulled the bell and the car went on, to which Ona burst into tears. At the next corner, she got out, of course, and she had no more money. She had to walk the rest of the way to the yards in the pouring rain. And so all day long she sat shivering, came home at night with her teeth chattering and the pains in the back of her head. For 2 weeks afterward, she suffered cruelly, and yet every day she had to drag herself to work. The forewoman was especially severe with Ona, because she believed that she was obstinate on the account of having been refused a holiday the day after her wedding. Ona had an idea that her forelady did not like to have her girls marry, perhaps because she was old and ugly and unmarried herself. We still have a little bit more time. There were many such dangers in which the odds were all against them. Their children were not as well as they had been at home, but how could they know that there was no sewer to their house, and that the drainage of 15 years was in a cesspool under it? How could they know that the pale blue milk that they had bought on the corner was watered and doctored with formaldehyde besides? When the children were not well at home, Tetta would gather herbs and cure them. Now she was obliged to go to the drugstore and buy extracts. And how she was to know what they were all unadulterated, if they were all unadulterated? How could they find out that their tea and coffee, the regular sugar and flour, had been doctored? That the canned peas that had been colored with copper salts, and their fruit jams with aniline dyes? And even if they had known it, what good would it have done to them, since there was no place within miles for them to buy anything else? The bitter winter was coming, and they had to save their money to get more clothing and bedding. And it would not matter in the least how much they saved. They could not get anything to keep themselves warm. All clothing that had been had in the stores had been made of cotton and was shoddy, which was made by tearing old clothes to pieces and weaving the fibers again. If they had paid higher prices, they might get frills and fanciness, or be cheated. But genuine quality they could not obtain for the love nor money. A young friend of Svedvilas recently had come from abroad. He had become a clerk in a store on Ashland Avenue, and he narrated with glee a trick that had been played upon an unsuspecting countryman by his boss. The customer had desired to purchase an alarm clock, and the boss had showed him two exact similar, telling him that the price of one was $1 and that the other was $1.75. Upon being asked what was the difference, the man had wound up the first halfway and the second all the way, and showed the customer how he later made twice as much noise. Upon which the customer remarked that he was a sound sleeper and had better take the more expensive clock. There was a poet who sings that. Deeper their heart grows, the nobler their bearing, whose youth in the fires of anguish hath died. Will you stop? Yes, my cat is in quite a mood tonight. We have a little bit more time. But it was not likely that he had reference to the kind of anguish that comes with destitution. That is so endlessly bitter and cruel, and yet so sordid and petty, so ugly, so humiliating, unredeemed by the slightest touch of dignity or even of pathos. It is the kind of anguish that poets have not commonly dealt with. in the very words are not admitted to the vocabulary of poets, and the details of it cannot be told in polite society at all. How, for instance, could anyone expect to excite sympathy among lovers of good literature by telling how a family found their home alive with vermin, and of all the suffering and inconvenience and humiliation they were put to, and the hard earned money they spent in efforts to get rid of them? After long hesitation and uncertainty, they paid 25 cents for a big package of insect powder, a patent preparation which chanced to be 95% gypsum, a harmless earth, a harmless earth which had cost about 2 cents to prepare. Of course, it had not the least effect, except upon a few roaches which had had the misfortune to drink water after eating it, and so got their inwards set in a coating of plaster of Paris. The family, having no idea of this, and no more money to throw away, had nothing to give up and submit to the more misery of the rest of their days. So our poor family here is just being hoodwinked um, here and there, and they're seeing people hoodwinked here and there. They've got vermin in their house, and the thing that they buy is just a bunch of gypsum. That's all it is. It's just a simple dust. So it's not going to help them get rid of it. Then there was old Antanas. The winter came, and the place where he had worked was dark, unheated cellar, where you could see your breath all day, and where your fingers sometimes tried to freeze. So the old man's cough grew worse and worse, until there came a time when it hardly ever stopped. He had become a nuisance about the place. Then, too, a still more dreadful thing happened to him. He worked in a place where his feet were soaked in chemicals, and it was not long before they had eaten through his boots. Then sores began to break out on his feet and grow worse and worse. Whether it was that his blood was bad or there had been a cut, he could not say. But he asked the men about it and learned that it was a regular thing. It was the saltpeter. Everyone felt it sooner or later, and then it was all up within him, at least for that sort of work. The sores could never heal. In the end, his toes would drop off if he did not quit. Yet old Antanas would not quit. He saw the suffering of his family, and he remembered what it had cost him to get the job. So he tied up his feet and went on limping and coughing until at last he fell into pieces, all at once into a heap, like the one horse shay. They carried him to a dry place and laid him upon the floor. And that night 2 of the men helped him home. The poor old man was put into bed. Though he tried every morning until the end, he could never get up again. He would not lie there and cough day and night, wasting away to a mere skeleton. There came a time when there was so little flesh on him that the bones began to poke through, which was such a horrible thing to see or even to think of. One night he had a choking fit, and a river of blood came out of his mouth. The family, wild with terror, sent for a doctor, paid a $50 to be told that there was nothing to be done. Mercifully, the doctor did not say that he did not say that the old man could fear, for he was still clinging to the faith that tomorrow or the next day would be better, and could go back to his job. The company had sent word to him that they would not keep it for him. Or rather, Yorgos had bribed one of the men to come by on a Sunday afternoon and say that they had. Antanas continued to believe it, while 3 more hemorrhages came, and then the last one morning they found him stiff and cold. Things were not going well with them then, and though it nearly broke Tedda's heart, they were forced to dispense with nearly all the decencies of the funeral. They had only a hearse and one hack for women and children and Yorgos, who was learning things fast. He spent all Sundays making a bargain for these, and he made it with the presence of a witness, so that when the men tried to change him for all the incidentals, he did not have to pay. For 25 years, Antanas and his son had dwelt in the forest together, and it was hard to part in this way. Perhaps it was just as well that Yorgos had to give all of his attention to the task of having a funeral without being bankrupt, and so had no time to indulge in memories and grief. Now the dreadful winter was come upon them. In the forest, all summer long, the branches of the trees do do battle for the light, and some of them lose and die. And then some come the raging blasts, and the storms and snow and hail, and strew upon the ground the weaker branches. Just so it was in Packingtown. The whole district braced itself for the struggle that was an agony, and those whose time came died off in hordes. All year round they had been serving as cogs in the great packing machine, and now was the time for renovating it and replacing the damaged parts. There came pneumonia and gripe, stalking among them, seeking for weakened constitutions. There was the annual harvest of those whom tuberculosis had been dragging down. There came cruel, cold, biting winds, blizzards of snow, all testing relentlessly for failing muscles and impoverished blood. Sooner or later came the day when the unfit one did not report to work, and then, with no time lost in waiting, and no inquiries or regrets, there came the chance for a new hand. All right, I think we're going to call it there. Where are we? 92, page 92. The Jungle. Okay. Well, my friends, today was, to say the least, very interesting. Lots of interesting news. So we'll get right to it. Our book is really, it's not if they made like the movie version of The Jungle, right? That's not like a good date night movie. But it's a story we need to know. It's a story that we need to appreciate, and it's part of our history. And we can't forget it. We can't forget it. We certainly can't forget the times that we're going through right now. And I'm sure that there are going to be books and movies and plays and, different things that are going to be written about the coronavirus and how we're weathering this storm. We can't just sweep it under the rug. We've got to hit it head on, and we've got to remember. Okay. So, what happened in today's news? So it seems as though, and if anybody's hearing anything different, feel free to throw it out there. But the gist that I'm getting is that we did have an uptick today in the amount of people, that died. About 100 more people died today than the day before, but it had also taken a little dip. So we're at about 11,000 New Yorkers that have passed away. However, there are also about 3,700 new cases today. But they're saying that the number of new hospitalizations has ticked down a little bit, but the new intubations have gone up a little bit. So, it kind of seems to me that it's just kind of like it's slowly on its way down, but it's it's kind of like you're going down, you're coming up, you're going down, you're coming up, you're going down, you're coming up, but I do think that we are making our way in the right direction, but I don't think that we're moving as quickly as certainly people want. And where I know the governor is saying that like the real hot spot right now is nursing homes. So one of the places, and this is across the country, is one of the places that they are keeping especially a careful eye on is anybody going in or out of a nursing home and people that are working in nursing homes. I saw today that they're saying that, they know now that thousands of healthcare workers probably have COVID, right? COVID-19, and they're continuing to go to work and they don't know it. Even though they're using gloves, even though they're using masks, even though they're, using all the gear, they're still getting the disease, getting the virus, they're carrying it, and they could be passing it along. So, not exactly, what we want to see, but it seems as though across the country, people are looking to the next step, which I think is important. Again, I think that we are going to survive this. This is not the zombie apocalypse. This is not an alien invasion. Though some days I pray for the alien invasion, and I wish that we would, or at least I would just get wiped out with the big laser blast. But today's not one of those days, and I think that we are going to move on, and I'm glad that people are starting to think about the next steps. Right. One of the things that today I was in a Google Meet with other adults, with other teachers and administrators, and it seems like some of our administrators are really starting to think like to September. Like, what if we don't go back? That means that it's going to be almost 7 months, 7 full months that some students will not have been in a classroom, right? Because we walked out. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. March, April, May, June, July, August. Okay, more like 6.5 months. But I think you guys get the point, right? We left school March 13th. That was our last day. We actually don't start classes until September 9th next year, which, if we don't go back this year, I wonder if they're going to change that. I wonder if they're actually going to maybe have us go back a little early. And that might not be a bad idea. It might not be. But I'm glad that people are starting to look forward. And I didn't write this whole thing down, but the governor of California basically said for him to reopen California and the Washington State and Oregon, right? Washington State, Oregon, California, our whole West Coast, excuse me, they have said that they want these 6 conditions to be met before they go full tilt. And one of the things that he said that I thought was kind of interesting is he said that I am not going to turn on the light switch, right? I'm not going to do that. Bam. I'm going to slowly turn up the dimmer, right? So if you might have a lights like that in your household where it's not a switch, you just kind of go, I'm just going to kind of turn it on a little, turn it on a little, turn it on a little, turn it on a little. And that's what he says he's going to do. But he's saying that it could be July or August before he allows things like, and this is if we continue to head in the same direction. He said things like concerts and large group meetings, he's not going to let happen until July or August. Now, when it comes to like where they are on the curve and where New York is on the curve, I think we're a little ahead of them. We have more people infected. California is a state of over 40 million people. We have around 19. So they're twice our size, but we have a lot more cases. And I think it's because they saw what was happening here and then they were able to react and kind of slow the craziness in the major cities down. But who knows? So I think that's kind of where we are. I think we might be kind of on the same timeline. So, okay. And part of what is happening is this. one of the first things that I did when we started all of this is that I posted a press conference with Governor Cuomo talking about the power of the federal government versus the power of the state government, and excuse me, who should really be in charge of handling this epidemic for us as New Yorkers? Should it be the federal government? Should it be the state government? So, this is exactly what's happening now is that Governor Cuomo is saying, well, when it comes to schools in New York and businesses in New York, I'm the dude. And President Trump is saying, yeah, no, I'm the guy. And it seems as though there are a lot of governors that are now starting to work together and form these little coalitions and saying, yeah, we're going to work together and we're going to make these decisions together. And one of the things that people are starting to call President Trump, King Trump, and but people have called Governor Cuomo King Andrew, right, or King Andy, because they feel like he's abused his power. But one of the things that the governor of California is saying is that, I told you he's got these 6 things that he wants to see happen. And one of those things is a vaccine. So he doesn't really want to fully open up the floodgate and just kind of get everything back to normal until there's a vaccine and we've created a herd immunity, right? So we can say that a majority of us are immune to whatever it is. Now, the last I heard, they're moving in a good direction, but we're not there yet. And, to think about a vaccine, we're talking about if we got one for every American, that's 330 million vaccines that we would need to produce and then give to Americans before we really start to open things up. So I'm not 100% sure that that's totally realistic. It could be, or maybe it's a certain part of the population. Like, again, if you're like a 20-year-old healthy individual and you don't have any other medical conditions, are you likely to get this? Well, maybe not. However, the fact of the matter is that younger people, older people, diabetics, people with heart conditions, now they're saying African Americans and Latinos, these are people that are more likely to catch this. I don't know, I don't know how we go about vaccinating. Do we vaccinate all those people first, or do we vaccinate the other people? Who's going to make these decisions? So I think realistically, getting everybody vaccinated is not. It's not going to happen before we open things up. But the other thing is that there are a number of states, and New York State is one of them, where people can say, hey, I'm not going to be vaccinated, and I'm not going to allow myself or my children to be vaccinated because it's a religious objection. So, this past weekend, a lot of people across the country risked a fine. They risked, churches risked, getting severely fined by going and celebrating Easter Mass. And, because they say the First Amendment to our Constitution says that we have the right to express ourselves. We have freedom of speech, which doesn't just mean we have the right to say something. It means we have the right to express ourselves in a lot of different ways. We get to practice whatever religion we want, and no religion is going to be forced upon us. So that's, people say, hey, listen, it's my faith that's going to protect me. I don't want to inject myself with a vaccine, and I'm not going to, have my children injected with these vaccines. So the point of it, long story or short story long, Mr. Martin, is that even if we get the vaccine, there are a lot of people in New York who say, no, I'm not going to take it. And that you may remember back in, was it in December? I think there was a measles outbreak, right? Maybe it was November. There was a measles outbreak in downstate New York. So, and this was because there were people down there that were not vaccinated to the measles. So, anyways, come on, guys, throw something out there. Let me know what you think about vaccines and whether we should make sure that everybody's vaccinated before we really open up the floodgates here. One of the cool things that I saw, and actually, we have a school district out here. If you guys out by where I live, Cobleskill, Richmondville School District years ago got a grant. And what they did was they enabled all of their buses with Wi-Fi. So kids that are, on the bus for an hour, well, guess what? Now the bus has Wi-Fi. So if they have a tablet or a Chromebook or whatever, boom, they can do their work on that long ride. And in Austin, Texas, the school district has enabled, was it 13 or 18 buses? I think 18 buses with Wi-Fi. And what they're doing is they're sending the buses out to different locations so that the kids and their families can come. And I think as long as they're within a 100-foot radius of the bus, they can connect to this high-speed Wi-Fi, and they can use it for whatever they want. And out by where I live, Middleburg Telephone, which is our internet provider, and I'll tell you right now, we actually have really good internet. They have set up 8 different Wi-Fi, like major fiber optic Wi-Fi hotspots all over. So up in the hills, there's 2 down in the village. Can't remember where they're. I think I don't know. I'll have to look. I think there's 8 of them. And so people, but they say, go to the hotspot, stay in your car, and you can use the Wi-Fi, and it's really, really good Wi-Fi. So that's one of the good things that I heard about today. One of the other things that I heard about today, and Mrs. D and I were talking about this, was that this was, you got to look for the positives. This was the first March since 2002 that something didn't happen in our country. I'm going to see if one of you guys, besides Mrs. D, if she's out there, we'll see if one of you knows or can guess. This was the first March that something pretty significant didn't take place since 2002. So every month things happen. And the month of March was the first time since 2002 this thing did not happen. So we'll see if somebody guesses. Now, President Trump, just a few hours ago, made a lot of people really upset. And a number of news agencies are saying that he did this because, well, he's not being looked on very favorably right now. His poll numbers are really starting to plummet. Joe Biden is gaining a lot of popularity right now. President Obama has come out and endorsed Joe Biden. Pretty much every significant Democrat in the country has endorsed Joe Biden to be the presidential nominee. And so President Trump today said that he is going to stop payment to the World Health Organization because he is blaming the World Health Organization for basically causing what is happening right now. He thinks that they did not put up enough red flags to really stop this pandemic from hitting our shores. So as a country, we are not going to contribute to the World Health Organization, at least at the moment. And again, a lot of people are saying that he's doing this because he's trying to push the blame on somebody else, but who knows? Who knows? Now, this is something that I saw today that, again, I wonder how many of you guys, two things. I wonder how many of you guys, what you guys think about this. The first one is my dad. So I don't know if I mentioned this last night, but my dad is retired and his bank whenever a major, or not a major, but whenever a scheduled deposit is going to be made, he gets like a notification from the app. So on Sunday night, he was notified that tomorrow the IRS is going to be making a deposit into his account. So we know, right? He knows that he is going to be getting some of that stimulus money tomorrow. So one of the things that the Treasury Department announced today is that and again, this is one of these things where you see it and you kind of go, huh? They are going to be able to use the stimulus checks basically being deposited into people that owe debts, like let's say in the form of student loan debts, and have not paid them. Student loans are a bad example, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But basically, the Treasury Department, now that people will have this money deposited in their accounts, they'll be able to start collecting the money and pay people's outstanding debts. So, you're giving the people the money to stimulate the economy, but then you're talking about taking the money away from them because they owe debts for whatever reason. And the reason that school loans or student loans are a bad example is that, and I don't know how long, but I know that is it 6 months? I think it's for 6 months. Student loans have been deferred. So people, I think it's 6 months. You don't have to make payments on your student loans, and that the interest, it's interest free for all that time. So meaning that you're not going to continue to rack up interest. When you go to college and you borrow loans, at least when I was in college, basically what happened was this: is that when you graduate from college, 3 months after graduation, you had to start paying those loans. So they're basically saying, okay, you're out of college. You got 3 months to get, your butt to get a job, and then you got to start paying us back some money. And you were given 24 months of deferment. So what that means is let's say you fell on hard times, or let's say that you didn't have a job in 3 months. You could then defer your loans and push them out. So when I got out of college, I had a job very quickly, and then I had a job for 2 or 3 years, and then I went through like a 3-month period where I was switching over jobs, and so what I did was I deferred my loans. I had, I think I took 4 months. So that left me 20 months. And then when my first son was born, my wife at the time was very worried about, because she was going to take 6 months of work off, very worried that, we weren't going to be able to keep up with our bills and all that kind of stuff. And we, of course, was fine. But again, I deferred my loans for 6 months, so to make things a little bit easier on us financially. So you can do that with your loans. But now the government is just giving everybody, or I should say, the lenders are giving everybody. The government's authorizing this deferment. And again, I apologize. I don't remember how long it was for. But anyways, so nobody threw up a guess. What didn't happen? Well, this is the first March since 2002 that something did not happen in our country: a shooting in a school. So 18 years, it's been 18 years that have gone by since we had a March that did not have a single school shooting. So I guess if there's any good byproduct of, what's happened as a result of this, is that, there wasn't a school shooting. However, there was last night a shooting in Loudonville, Latham area. And it seems as though it's very similar to what happened in California. I told you about that the other day. It looked like there was a party in California, Santa Clara, I think, California, and somebody went by and they shot up the party because they were upset that people were not socially distancing, and 6 people were shot at that party. What I saw early this morning, I didn't see any follow up, but when the police investigated the shooting, they found 3 bullets lodged in the side of the house. Um, so again, I didn't see any follow up of that. If there was anything they caught anybody, I know they said that there was an SUV that the neighbors had seen basically go back and forth several times before the actual shooting took place. But I think again, some people out there are definitely starting to get a little unhinged through all this, and I think we're starting to see the result of people just saying, "Hey, we think that the government and other people aren't doing enough," and they're starting to take things into their own hands. But I hope that this won't be the only march where we don't see a school shooting, and I certainly hope that we don't see any other shootings like this. But it seems like uh, it seems like like I said again, people are certainly becoming unhinged. So the other thing that I wanted to leave you guys with in regards to our current events, we'll of course do our on this day in history. But so a congressman in Indiana said this: letting more people die, letting more Americans die of this coronavirus disease is the lesser of two evils when it comes to reopening the economy. So, what he's been saying, he was interviewed a few times and interviewed on the news today, is basically he's saying, listen, people are dying, people are going to die. However, if we don't get the economy rolling again, there could be potential for more sorrow. So we've talked about a number of times that all of our government officials are balancing public health, economic ruin. And we know the figures haven't been out this week yet about unemployment, but we know that over 20 million Americans are unemployed right now. The two worst hurt states are California and New York. And I'm assuming that there's still more of this to come. As a matter of fact, today I saw that 2 different regional health centers in our area. I want to say one in Whitehall, and the other one might have been in Glens Falls. Were closing. They're just closing because they just can't continue in this direction the way that we're headed. They can't keep their doors open. And these were not places that were dealing with COVID patients, but they're just saying we don't have the PPE, we don't have the right way to be able to handle people coming in. My son's supposed to get his wisdom teeth out. We actually got a call today. They called off the pre-operation appointment, which was scheduled for March 1st, May 1st. Because they can't safely do what they need to do. My other son was supposed to have his last ortho follow up. He's had his braces off for a while, but you keep going and going until they say, okay, things are good. And we were kind of hoping that this was going to be the last one. And actually I think that was supposed to be today, and they canceled that last week. So it's more and more people are going to be, applying for unemployment. More and more people are going to be furloughed. And again, that furloughed word, which I think you've probably heard, that is, basically, hey, listen, you've got a job, but we can't pay it right now. And it does seem that like a lot of places are saying, hey, listen, you've got a job and we're going to keep paying for your healthcare plan, but we can't pay, give you a paycheck. So tomorrow is the big day. What I really hope, ladies and gentlemen, is that when I see you tomorrow night, that I'm able to report that a lot of Americans are starting to get that money deposited into their bank account. Tomorrow is the real big day. I don't know if you guys have heard of anybody. I've heard some people have already gotten their money. But again, what that might be is, again, these things are scheduled, and banks will sometimes know days ahead of time that these deposits are coming. So they'll release the funds like at midnight or maybe at like 8 o'clock the night before or something like that. So maybe some people are starting to see that $1,200 or whatever. If again the families are a family of four can get what is it up to? Is it 30? I think $3,200. So families of four could really get a nice amount of money for per each spouse, and then $500 per kid. So I don't know. I don't know if we just open up the floodgates and we open the economy back up. My suspicion is that, like, let's say we did open school. Let's say that tomorrow we got the call from Mr. Shine, and Mr. Shine said on April 29th everybody's coming back to school. I think some people will come back. I think some teachers probably would burn some sick days. I think a lot of kids would say, hey, you know what? I think I'm just not going to come back. I think I'm just, and there probably are going to be parents that are going to say, we're just not going to send our kids. So I personally think we've kind of got to get to a place where people are really confident. People are just confident that when we come back to all this, that it's going to be safe. Okay. So my friends, on this day in history, interesting, 1775, so before we were even a country, in 1775, on this day, the first abolition society was established in Philadelphia. The first American society to abolition or to abolish the institution of slavery was founded. In 1818, and I know this is something that you guys, your generation just doesn't use anymore because of, your smartphones and all that kind of stuff. But on 1818, on this day, the first English Webster dictionary was released. On this day in 1865, yesterday we said that President Lincoln was shot on that day in 1865, but it was actually today that he actually died. On this day in 1923, and this is something that comes out of our discussion about philanthropists and philanthropy, but we talked about John D. Rockefeller put a lot of his own personal money into the research done to help diabetics. And on this day in 1923, the first public consumption of insulin was administered. For the first time, the public in 1923 could buy insulin to deal with their diabetes. And if you do or do not know this, it was actually for a very long time, until about, I think, 10 years ago, that insulin was harvested from pigs. And that's how when you saw diabetics shoot themselves with insulin, today it's synthetic insulin, but for a very, very long time, it was the insulin of pigs. Also in 1923, on this day, the first movies with sound in New York City, the first movies with sound for an audience. On this day in 1935, it will be known as Black Sunday, where we haven't talked about this yet, but not only did the Depression really ripped the country apart financially. But another thing was happening out west, and part of it was Mother Nature, and part of it was human greed. But the Dust Bowl, which was the Midwest or the West, had become a very arid place, and part of it was from over farming, and these horrible dust storms just made the place a miserable place, and farmers were losing their farms that had been in their families for generations. But the Dust Bowl, they say this Dust Bowl storm, this Black Sunday, was the worst of all of the storms, and it was literally millions and millions and millions of tons of dust had been picked up and just thrown for miles and miles and miles. And I think more people had died in this storm than in any other storm during the Dust Bowl. The other thing that I found on this day in 1986, we bomb Libya. So, today we are engaged in a war on terror in a number of different countries. And one of the countries that in that region we have always had some tension with, at least for a long time, was the country of Libya. They have had a military dictator for a very long time, Muammar Gaddafi. And in the early 80s, he had really tried to force himself and his strength upon his neighbors. And he was trying to harvest. There are two things in Libya, gold and oil, that make a lot of people rich, but it also brings a lot of poverty to a lot of people. And either you're pretty rich in Libya or you're really poor. There's not a lot of in between, and there isn't a big middle class there. And so our president at the time, President Reagan, and Muammar Gaddafi had disagreed about quite a few things. And I think it's in 81 or 82, President Reagan orders some U.S. jets to patrol the Mediterranean Sea because Libya is trying to assert its power in the Mediterranean. And a few of our jets get tangled up with a couple of their jets. We, blow up their jets. It was, no real battle. Our military was a Cold War, very high-tech military, and they just didn't have, anything that can really, do battle with our Air Force. And so what happens is 5 years later, in 1986, Libya pays and helps plan. The government of Libya helps to plan and pay for an attack on a discotheque in Germany. Since World War II and still to today, one of the largest concentrations of Americans outside of America is in Germany, and that's because we have a massive Air Force base there. We have a huge military hospital there. So obviously there's a lot of American servicemen and women there. And they bomb this discotheque because they know that there are Americans that are going to be there. And in response, on this day in 1986, President Reagan orders a massive attack. It's like over 100 jets. I want to say it's 112 jets. Just bomb the living heck out of Libya, out of Tripoli, and out of Benghazi, their two major cities. And that is one of the first times that Americans on the news start to see smart munitions. And what I mean by that is on the news, they start to show the footage of basically, you see the building and then you see the camera, you see the camera from the bomb that it's shooting back the footage, and boom, it goes right down and it blows up the building. And they were literally dropping bombs in chimneys. Like here's the here's the exhaust pipe of, this army headquarter in Tripoli. Boom, ran, bam. We just start whaling these targets, and I can't remember how many thousands of tons of munitions that we drop on them, but we really do a number on them. And then a couple years later, the Libyans will bomb over Lockerbie, Scotland. They will again work with terror organization, pay terror organization to blow up a plane of Americans that are coming back from Scotland and heading back. And it kind of hits home because 34 of those passengers on that plane are from Syracuse University. So, a lot of them are from our area, not far from us. And, if you guys remember, the Libyans are kind of in the 80s, one of those people that we really kind of, pinned up as the bad guys. And if you've seen the movie Back to the Future, right? Doc is making that bomb in the the beginning of the movie for Libyan terrorists, right? All these absolutely horrible guys, and they end up, they end up shooting Doc and killing Doc because the bomb that he makes them is it's just it's not a real bomb. It's a piece of crapola. But the Libyans for quite some time were just a group of people, a country that we just didn't want to have anything, to deal with. So, and we just kept looking at them as these bad, horrible people. But it's really the people that ran the country, not them. But anywho, my friends, that's all I have for you today. It's almost 10:15. Ran a little late tonight. We'll see, as the days come. I'm very interested to see what we see with tomorrow in regards to people getting some stimulus money. I want to talk a lot about that tomorrow. I've been doing some research, and I want to talk a lot about what the experts are saying is the best way for us to spend this money, and so we'll talk about that tomorrow. But, have a great night. I miss you guys. And I hope to see you soon. I don't know if it's going to be this year, but I truly hope that it is. Keep running the marathon. Don't run the sprint. We'll get there day by day. Get outside, get some exercise. Gonna be a nice week. It can be a little chilly, but it looks like it's going to be sunny all week. So get out there, get a walk, sit in the sun, read a book, and I'll see everybody tomorrow. Have a great night, guys.